Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving my prediction for the undercard of the Terry Harper versus Caroline Dubois fight. I had done my prediction for that through the Patreon, and you can request your own content on the Patreon if you join, and you can also use the Patreon for betting tips and advice as well. And so that came out about a month ago, so I'm now here to do my prediction for basically the undercard, which is the three world title fights which are on this card through the stacked MVP W now promotion, which they're going to of course be showing on Sky, and it's their first UK event as well. So this is what I'm here to talk about today. If you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into this one. And again, like I mentioned, this is a very stacked card. It's exciting to see Sky Sports involved again with boxing. Of course, they've also got, the night before they're going to be showing the Deontay Wilder versus Derek Chisora fight. So it's just exciting to see Sky back in boxing again, because they are such a big sports broadcaster in the UK that I feel like they have to be involved with boxing to some degree. It doesn't have to be always consistent shows, week in, week out, but I feel like big shows, they can definitely be on Sky, and it makes sense in my opinion. We'll start off with my prediction for the Ellie Scotney fight, and this is definitely a needed fight for the winner to become undisputed. Of course, it was meant to happen, I think, a couple months ago, and for whatever reason it didn't. I think one of the fighters got an injury, but now of course it's been rescheduled, and like I say, it's nice to also see that MVP are making fights like this possible, where champions like Flores could have gone down the route of what Mercado did and another champion on this card in Irma Garcia did, which is kind of just keep the belt in Mexico and not really fight that often, and not really allow any other top names to fight them, instead just holding up the division a bit. And again, we've seen that with a couple of fighters recently out in South America, where they have just won a title and been able to continually get matches made there, which are against lesser opponents, which aren't really being broadcasted all that much, and aren't really getting pushed that well either. And it's just not against the opponents in which you want to see, just not really fighting the other champions as well, and like I say, just holding up that title. Flores hasn't done that, but again, Mercado, who was Scotney's last opponent, did do that. And she had fought big names, like she'd fought Ramla Ali before, which was the first time where she kind of branched into fighting elsewhere, but again, that was on a Matchroom show. And then she took the fight against Scotney. But then before that, she had fought Amanda Serrano, but she'd had that super bantamweight title for a long time, where she was just not letting it leave Mexico, and she was just fighting lesser name opponents when it didn't need to happen. And again, Flores, she could have gone down that same route, and it did look like that. I'll speak a bit more about her in just a moment, but again, like I mentioned, it's nice to see that MVP are making these fights happen, with fighters from all over coming to actually have that mutual best versus best type of fight. Scotney was a big signing for MVP to leave Matchroom. It was a big deal to see that MVP were able to have that pull and that drive, I suppose, to encourage fighters to come and fight for them and leave big promoters like Matchroom. But so far in her career, it has been a real good move for her, adding the, of course, WBC belt to her list last time out, and now going for undisputed. But does it mean that possible matchups like a fight with Sky Nicholson, which of course is a big fight and probably, in a name value, the biggest fight in the super bantamweight division she could have, might be hard to make, because of course Nicholson is still with Matchroom. Again, we'll have to wait and see, but at the same time, Scotney does hold the cards of her being the champion, so, if Sky Nicholson is going to be building towards what Scotney has. So again, that should, like I say, make sense as a fight at some point. But possibly it might be a little bit harder to make with the promotional issues. But people also do forget as well a real good win Scotney has on her resume. I mean, she has some real good wins. I mean, she's beaten, long reigning champs like Leffe Burr. She beat Miyamoto, who was undefeated at the time and was looking good coming through. But she also has a win against the now undisputed super bantamweight champion, who's a fellow MVP fighter, in Shanika Johnson, which is a real good win for her. So again, she really has fought a lot of good name fighters, and she's in a real good spot in her career at the moment, and she's been able to have success against all of them, and not really had too many fights that have been awfully close, really. Flores, I thought, was fortunate to be given a title shot after losing to Luna in 2022, fighting for the belt, and then she, got the opportunity to fight Nazarena Romero, and then I think she went away and, just didn't really fight for a while. She was able to uh, do what Cruz and Rivas couldn't, two former champions, and actually beat Romero. But like I say, she just went away for a while and didn't really fight. I think that was the at some point in 2025 that she had that fight, and again, it wasn't. It was a good win for her. It was an all action fight. It was a very exciting fight on a real good show, to be fair. But again, she just hasn't fought at quite that same level, because of course we saw Romero was quite a long reigning champion, but then, at the same time, she had them draws also to Rivas and Cruz. So anytime she actually took a bit of a step up, she did draw. So, it was an interesting one to kind of think, and predict for, I suppose, is probably the right way to put it. But then, like I say, yeah, she had almost now a year out, and it did look like possibly she would be going down that route of, not really trying to push for too many matchups and actually, like I say, or just wait around for only the big matchups, which of course she's ended up having here. But it's nice to see that she's actually, back and she's fighting now, and of course she's having a chance to defend her belt. And I feel like it could be an all-action fight here. There is, of course, a significant height gap between the two of them, which is the majority time case for Flores. It was a big height gap difference between her and Romero isn't really that tall of a fighter. I think that Scotney's 5'4" and Flores is, I believe, 4'11". So again, there is a big height difference between the two of them, and that'll be interesting if it plays a factor. But of course, I do believe that Flores is used to being the smaller fighter in fights. Let's speak about both fighters individually though. Scotney, as a fighter, she will walk you down. I think she pairs up her punches nicely. She's got a good technique in her punches as well. Something I've realised with a lot of fighters trained by Shane McGuigan, if you kind of look at Scotney, you look at Dubois, you look at even on the men's side, Chris Billum-Smith as well, they have a kind of certain thing in common where they're well drilled fighters who have a good technique and do have good fundamentals when they use them, and they can be well disciplined when they want. But at the ends of fights, they just, or even when times get tough, they do just resort to going to a war, and that just doesn't seem to be something in which you can get out of any of them fighters that fight with Shane McGuigan. I don't know if that's just the nature of all them types of fighters. It probably is, but is he, I suppose, disciplining them hard enough to then be, strict in, you've got to be a disciplined fighter. You've got to stick to this. You can't get just drawn into a fight. Because I've seen it with Scotney. I've seen it with Dubois against Shin. Scotney in our last fight against Mercado, to be fair. And then Billum-Smith, we've seen him on a couple of occasions just go to war as well when it just doesn't need to happen. But again, typically when they're at their best, especially Scotney, she's got a real good technique in her punches, and she does, shorten of her hooks nicely. She'll create angles and gaps in close, which is, very impressive, and she's pretty accurate in her work. She's got kind of a nice spring up in her combinations where she'll duck down and spring up into a punch, which again in close can work nicely and can mean she can have a bit more of a snap in her punches. She's not the most powerful. I don't think she's got any stoppages on her resume, but again, she does seem to have a decent kind of spring in her punch. She is typically, offering a pretty high output, and she's also got her hands pretty high early on in the fight, which does mean she's a little bit harder to land on early. But again, that can change, and that can slow throughout the fight and drop throughout the fight, I suppose, as well. She changes head to body nicely in her punches. She sets a pretty high tempo, like I've mentioned, and when she keeps her hands high and brings her punches back to that position, when she's at the start, she looks very, like I say, well disciplined in that way. But it's just how long that we can see that happen for. She does, seem to love a tear up, and again, that's something in which I've seen the case with multiple Shane McGuigan fighters. Negatives about Scotney: she does, like I mentioned, drop her hands late, and she was getting caught more by Mercado from doing that in her last fight. She can smother her work a bit as well. She can sometimes, I think, also set too high of a pace. Again, that did seem to be the case in that Mercado fight, where she did look quite, tired at the end of that fight, which was something in which I haven't really seen it all too much throughout her career, where she did look really exhausted. But that fight did seem to take quite a lot out of her. She stands quite tall, and her head movement can be forgotten about as well when she's not, ducking into them punches. Again, this is later on in the fight. She can go back in lines. That's kind of throughout the fight. She can stay in range too long. She's not the fastest with her reactions as well. She's got a nice time short hook which she does throw, but again I do feel like she isn't the quickest with her reactions, even though her hand speed generally is pretty good. The power to keep you off is, sometimes something in which she doesn't have, and again, fighters can get encouraged to keep coming forwards when she's not really kind of stopping them and slowing them down all that much. She's quite tense when she's throwing as well. She can force the fight a bit as well in certain exchanges when she doesn't need to. When I was watching the Leffe Burr fight, I was there in person to watch that actually, and that was a fight where she was starting to force it at times a bit, and when she didn't need to, even quite early in the fight, and you could see that she wanted to go to a war and she was getting caught a bit too much, but then she was doing enough to win the fight. It's just like, say, certain things where she just didn't need to, and she does square up a bit as well. Again, if she can keep her shape for longer, she can have more success, especially in a fight like this where Flores is probably going to welcome a war, and that's going to want to be what she's wanting in this fight. Flores, a bit more about her as a fighter. She's a real Mexican war type fighter. Something I like about what she does, which she doesn't do all the time, but when she does do it, she comes forwards with her jab as a bit of a jousting jab from a low position, which means she's actually quite hard to land on when she does do that, because it's hard to get over that up jab, which is nice, but again, she does forget to use that at times. She commits very much to her big punches over and over again. We've seen her commit to every kind of punch in which she's thrown. She definitely isn't afraid. She's hard to slow down, and she does make you fight her fight, which was what Romero had to deal with and just couldn't deal with in their fight. She's actually got a little bit of head movement when she uses it as well, but that's something in which can be neglected again later on into the fight. She puts on the pressure throughout all of it. She sets a high tempo from the very get-go and does just keep continually coming with that high tempo, which again could disrupt the disciplined early possible stages of Ellie Scotney and could just force her straight into a war. She's got a good chin. I think she's taken some punches from some pretty, strong fighters and been able to keep coming forwards. And she takes a lot of punches and keeps coming forwards. She throws with power, and she always aims to get the best out of any exchanges in which she's in. If she isn't landing the more powerful punch in the exchange, she's going to try and then respond with the most powerful punch, if that makes sense. Negatives about her: she launches herself in from too far out, so she does miss widely at times. She's heavy over her front foot, ducking her head down. There's times where she doesn't even look like she's looking where she's punching, because her head can either be really ducked down, or she's just getting caught with punches so much coming in that she just can't see where she's actually punching herself, which again can lead to her missing. Her defensive movement is pretty much non-existent. She doesn't go on the defensive at any point. She's flat-footed. She takes punches and doesn't really try and defend them at all, really. She sometimes has a bit of a high guard, but that drops quite early, and when she's throwing, that's low as well. She she doesn't really work different ways to come in. She'll try and use the head movement to get herself in a bit, but again, it's not really doing too much. When she's using the head movement, she's not really going forwards. When she's doing that, she's just kind of standing still, moving ahead, and that's not the way to be able to actually get yourself in from head movement. She forgets her jab. She doesn't really set up punches with any other punches, like say a jab or just anything in general, going kind of low to high or anything like that. And she's not really, like I say, always looking at what she actually throws. But who do I think is going to win this fight? I think that Ellie Scotney is going to be able to win via a unanimous decision. If Scotney sticks to a bit more of a game plan for enough of the fight, I think she's going to be able to win. But I think it is going to be inevitable that at some point in this fight, it's going to end up being a bit of a war. Again, we'll have to wait and see how much, and I think Scotney will be the one to land cleaner if it does go to a war, which I think, again, will go into her favour. Flores will just fluster her a bit and probably, make her a bit cautious to an extent and actually put her on the back foot a little bit, which, again, could actually bring a few more defensive, more disciplined kind of traits, I suppose, into a game where she is probably going to keep her hands up a little bit more. She does get caught with a few big shots, but it will be interesting to see if she does tire out by Flores' pace, which could happen, which could lead to Flores winning a couple of the later rounds. But I think Scotney would have done enough to win a unanimous decision and become undisputed champion. And then who she can go on to fight next? I mean, again, like I mentioned, the Sky Nicholson fight is a good fight. Nicholson is, I think, the interim WBC champion. So again, that could be a good fight if it can get made. If not, an Erica Cruz fight again will be an absolute war as well of two people who are just going to stand and trade. That could be interesting. I mean, other than that, there's not really, too many other contenders. Mickey Krebs is another name, a young-ish American fighter who's undefeated, but she hasn't really fought anybody of real note. Again, there's not really any other names unless she goes up to featherweight. But again, as a undisputed champion, I'm sure she's going to want to defend the undisputed belts, which I wouldn't blame her for doing. So again, a Sky Nicholson fight or an Erica Cruz fight will probably be the fights that I would like to see the most. And to now speak about another world title fight on this card, it is just Chantelle Cameron versus Michaela Kotakova for the vacant WBO World Super Welterweight Champion and World Super Welterweight title. And again, this is I was going to say again, it's a good fight, but it's not really. It's a very random fight. I think to be happening for both of these fighters in this points in their careers, especially for Cameron, it's just like I say, very weird. For Cameron, she is now moving up into the super welterweight division, jumping up 2 weight divisions to get a vacant world title shot of a belt that I thought was being owned by Michaela Mayer. Mayer in her last fight fought Mary Spencer, and this was one of the titles in which she fought for. I think she has decided to keep her WBO welterweight title, so she's vacated this WBO super welterweight title. Again, I might be incorrect with that, but I think that's the case because I did think that Mayer won this title and owns this title, but again, obviously not. Instead, Cameron, like I say, has jumped up 2 divisions to have this fight. She hasn't looked the most impressive in her last few fights, in my opinion, but has been winning them clearly. She had a lot of momentum after the 2 fights with Taylor, even though she lost the second one, and there was a real push for a trilogy, but that just never really seemed to happen, and she was just continuously talking about that, and Taylor was kind of pushing back on it a bit, and again, Taylor's only going to really have one more fight in her career, I think, at Crow Park, so that could be the fight to be made, but now that Cameron's moved up to super welterweight, it would be a big drop to go back down again, and again, I don't know if that would happen, but it would be nice to see happen again, and Cameron does deserve it, but again, since that kind of momentum drop, she's kind of jumped around with promoters. She signed with Queensbury for a couple fights and they didn't really offer her anything, and now she's joined MVP as well and they've actually got her a world title fight, but again, it's just in a random weight. She's continued to fight known top contenders holding the interim WBC belt at super lightweight, but never got her shot, like I mentioned again, at Taylor, and now she's moved up to this weight possibly because it's the easiest way for her to get a world title shot. I mean, she could have moved up to welterweight and she might have looked better at welterweight. Again, she's not to say she's not going to look bad at this weight, but we just don't know what to expect. But she could have moved to welterweight and fought Lauren Price, and that would have been a real good fight that I would have been really excited for. But, I'm sure with Boxer promoting Price and things like that, it was going to be a hard fight to make nonetheless. So, with MVP, they probably just said, this is an easy route to get a world title fight and to possibly on paper win a world title. So, this is probably your best bet. But I just don't know if I see her actually sticking around at this weight all that long with the likes of Michaela Mayer floating around as well and other champions like O'Shea Jones, well, the other champion in O'Shea Jones, who's, a tough fighter as well. But again, hopefully, MVP can get some actual bigger fights, bigger name fights for her after this if she does become a world champion because, then she's got something to fight for. And so I don't discredit her for taking this fight. It's just very random and unexpected in my opinion. Kotakova has campaigned her career at welterweight, winning the WBF world title, which is, not really a belt in which anybody really talks about or associates with anything, but it is technically a world title. But she hasn't really fought any known contenders, so for her to get bumped into a world title shot is random as well. Like, I do understand there isn't that many contenders around in the division, but there is someone still ranked higher than her with the WBO, which is Dilara Usel, who also won the WBF title, but actually at super welterweight. So if you were going to go down that route, why not go for the actual number one contender, who's ranked higher than Chantelle Cameron, I think, in Usel. And so, who and actually has had more fights, even though hasn't fought that higher level of opposition either. Why not go for somebody like her? Again, she probably did deserve the shot over Kotakova, but of course we have, her now getting given this opportunity, which, I mean, you could definitely argue is, again, random and not really deserved. Cameron has adopted a style of just going toe to toe, and she does it well, responding with good short punches and keeping a high tempo, but she does get caught a lot through trading, making fights seem and look harder than they definitely need to be, and that's at any level as well. I mean, last time out against Kamara, she was getting caught a lot more than what she, needed to be, and I feel like, her style is just a toe-to-toe war type of style, which again can work to a certain degree, but when you come against an actual really well-skilled boxer, she can get caught out, and she hasn't. Katie Taylor was able to outwork her through hand speed, and she's always going to go toe to toe as well, Katie Taylor. But again, if she fought somebody maybe like a Lauren Price or I don't know, somebody like Michaela, they might be able to outsmart her to an extent. But, like I say, she's been making these fights with these lower level fighters like Kamara, who, is a good known contender. But, Dubois made pretty easy work of Kamara. Obviously, that was at a much lower, weight division. But again, still, like I say, it wasn't the best look last time out, in my opinion. Kotsakova can definitely test Cameron with her style, being a rangy back foot fighter, but with smart pressure, she can get caught up in exchanges herself, Kotsakova, which she doesn't really seem to be too comfortable in and doesn't really want to be in. So I am going to go with a Chantelle Cameron win via a unanimous decision. I think it's going to be comfortable enough for her to be able to get past the rangy punches of Kotsakova, but, they could definitely catch her, on occasions, Cameron, but I would like to see Cameron put on the smart pressure, cut off the ring, and distribute punches that way, and again be able to have success through that. It will just be interesting to see how she looks and acts in the super welterweight division, and if she can keep a tempo, which she does normally like to keep at that division, at that weight. Again, we'll have to wait and see. But then who she can go on to fight next? Again, Mayer, O'Shea Jones. Mayer, I think, is WBA and WBC champion at the moment in the super welterweight division. So, that's a good fight, of course. Jones, IBF champion. Cameron could go back down and fight Lauren Price if, that fight ever becomes available or an option. That would be a great fight that I'd be very interested in. Or, of course, Usel, if she's going to just go down this contenders route and try and keep this belt for as long as she can. Moving on to the final fight in which I'm going to be speaking about on this card, which is one that I'm pretty excited for, in Irma Garcia versus Emma Dolan for the IBF World Super Flyweight title. This is the perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, of a fighter who has been holding up the division as a champion. Garcia hasn't defended her belt since December 2024 in Mexico, after winning it, after being given a fortunate title shot not long after losing, fighting for the same belt. She beat Stephanie Silva, which was a good win at the time for her, when Silva was undefeated, and probably the best win of her career, but a win that didn't age that well, with Silva losing again to Artiga pretty clearly, after being given again another fortunate title shot. But then that was back in 2023. Garcia then defended it against Gallardo, like I say, in December of 2024, which was, a good win for her as well. But again, Gallardo isn't already that tough, and I mean, she won clearly, but then Gallardo got given a shot again. I don't know why again, against Hiruta, and Hiruta made very clear and easy work for her as well, showing that she isn't a world title level fighter. So, she hasn't really fought anybody too high level, in my opinion. Irma Garcia hasn't actually been able to beat them. She has fought and lost to some high level fighters, but actually being able to beat them is a different story. Then she fought a journeywoman in Mexico last year, I think, which she wasn't fighting for her world title when she was fighting in that fight, which again is just more stuff which I don't understand, how a fighter can, not fight for a title when she wants to have a bit of a warm-up fight, even though she is the world champion, and then just come back to still being the world champion again. No British fighter could get away with doing that. No American fighter, I don't believe, could get away with doing that. It just, in my opinion, like I say, just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't happen outside of, Mexico. But I've been calling for Dolan to get her chance at a world title, not even just a world title level fight, even just a European title level fight for a while. And she almost, had that fight arranged. I was hearing rumors about the European title being made at one point, but then that fell through, which was, a real shame for her because she's always struggled to get a promoter on her side and a big enough promoter on her side, and to now be working with MVP is real nice, and I'm really happy for her. I mean, I watched her fight for the Commonwealth title in a small hall show. So again, to be able to go from small hall to where she is now, fighting on a big card on Sky, being promoted by MVP, fighting, like I say, for a world title is a real good progression, which I'm sure at that point she probably never even thought would have been possible. She is a very talented fighter, in my opinion, who has had to go the hard route, fighting on other opponents' home shows to get wins, beating a Matchroom prospect in Shannon Ryan, which was a real good fight where, she landed a good shot and actually was able to drop Ryan. Yes, it was a little bit of a controversial drop in my opinion because she did start to kind of, grab her head and start back hitting her on the back of the head, which again shouldn't have really been counted as her being knocked down. But she did hurt her with, the punch she landed before, then hit her in the back of the head. So again, she did hurt Ryan with that, and after that the momentum shifted drastically and she was able to outbox her and have a lot of success, and that did age well with Ryan going on to beat Chloe Watson. So again, that was a good win for her and definitely could have pushed her on to bigger and better things. But then she went and fought Lauren Parker instead for her defending of her British title, which she won. But again, she wasn't then getting propelled along enough, in my opinion. But of course, now she's getting this opportunity, and it's really nice to see, in my opinion. Neither of these two are the most technical of fighters, I don't believe, or the most powerful, even though, of course, like I said, Dolan did technically drop Ryan in their fight. I do like the long punches of Dolan in often combinations with her rangy, tall weapons, I suppose, in which she does have, she's a tall, rangy fighter, which, often is punching down on opponents, and it works well for her with the straight shots because opponents just can't really seem to come in. And of course, that's been the case for a lot of fighters who have had the fortunate ability, I suppose, or the fortunate genetics to be a tall fighter in a weight division which is full of shorter fighters. She can look a bit uncontrolled in her work at times, and she does stand tall to get hit. Garcia, I think, will not really get discouraged and will try and keep coming back with stuff, but she isn't the most accurate at all, in my opinion. She's probably more willing to box at a mid-range, but I just don't feel like she's going to be able to get her punches through enough. But like I say, I don't feel like she'll back off or back down. So again, this could be a very competitive fight. I think it will be interesting to see if either of these two can actually hurt the other one. But again, I'm not really too sure with, like I said, the lack of stoppages between the two of them. Only 6 stoppages between the two of them, where Dolan's had... she's had 8 fights, had 1 stoppage, and Garcia's had... this might be her 30th fight, and she's had 5 stoppages. So again, not really that much between any of them. So I'm going to go with my prediction, an Emma Dolan win via a unanimous decision. I think it is going to be comfortable enough with the more accurate punches in Dolan's favour, and I think Garcia is going to struggle with the height and the reach of Dolan, and I think Dolan, like I say, is going to go on to become a world champion now in just 9 professional fights, which again is very impressive. And then who should go on to fight next? I mean, possibly Shannon Ryan again, who is ranked at number 1 with the IBF, like I say, coming off her Chloe Watson win. Could be a good fight. Or Fernandez is a Mexican fighter who's fought a few times for world titles and not been successful just yet, but she's ranked pretty well with the IBF as well, and she's gotten a few good wins, well, not really good wins, but a progressive amount of wins in Mexico to be able to, I suppose, warrant her getting a title shot again. So again, that could be another good Mexican fighter for her to possibly go up against Dolan. Or, a real exciting one would be Mizuki Hiruta for the, WBO and IBF titles. Hiruta is signed with 360 Boxing Promotions, but if perhaps, MVP could get involved with Hiruta's career, that would be, really good in my opinion, because I think Hiruta's come at a bit of a stuck position where she's just not fighting the other champions, and so I would be really excited to see her actually get a fight against one of the other champions, because she's getting the recognition now as a really talented fighter, being, given the recognition through the Ring magazine, but she's not getting, like I say, pushed still enough to be challenging the other world champions, and I think she could go on to possibly become undisputed Hiruta. But yeah, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Like the video if you did, indeed like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.